Be sure to visit my website, www.saracarter.com, for my latest reporting and stories. And while you're there, be sure to subscribe to my email list so that we can stay in touch. So today I have Dr. Aaron Kheriaty. He is phenomenal, to say the least. You are going to be blown away by this interview. He has written a book that is exposing, I would say, the greatest danger facing us right now, and that is our government's power over us, the American people. And it's a global phenomena. It becomes possible with technology that we never imagined we could have. And we absolutely saw it happen during COVID and during the lockdowns and during the government's strong arming of us during that very difficult time. You do not want to miss the show. He has written a book. This is Dr. Aaron Kheriaty. He's the author of The New Abnormal: The Rise of the Biomedical Security State. It is fascinating. And he's going to be here with us momentarily. I am going to just give him this show because I want to bring him back. I mean, I was so fascinated. Just so you know, I already recorded this with him, and then I'm coming right to do this monologue with, to talk to you. But I just felt that he was such an important guest with so much information, valuable information for all of us, on how we can stand up to this tyranny and what we need to do to fight back. And it's just that important. It is just that important. Everyone, please subscribe and get all the links at my website, saracarter.com, saracarter.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list so that you do not get shadow banned. Also, please subscribe to my new documentary podcast, Dark Wars: The Border. I am going to take you on a journey that will open up your eyes, a journey that you will go on with me as we try to regain control of our nation, stop the chaos at the U.S. border that is destroying our country and killing our children. And by the way, creating a humanitarian crisis in the Western Hemisphere that is going to haunt us for decades to come. It has been getting rave reviews, and I know that all of you will love it as well. Visit our website at thedarkwarspod.com. That is darkwarspod.com for the latest information. Before we get to Dr. Aaron Kheriaty, I want to talk to you about my good friend, Mike Lindell, and a great sponsor of the Sara Carter Show. And right now, Mike Lindell with My Pillow, has one of the best sales of the year. You want you to go to mypillow.com/Carter, because right now you can get a 6-piece towel set regularly $89.98. Now you're going to get it for $39.98. How can you beat that? All you have to use is the promo code Carter. You get a 60-day money-back guarantee that is extended. Orders placed between now and December 25th will have their 60-day money-back guarantee extended through, guess what? March 1st, 2023. You just can't beat it. And you're going to love the towels. You're never going to return them. For a limited time, get the My Pillow 6-piece towel set regularly $89.98 for only $39.98 at mypillow.com/Carter with promo code Carter. There you'll find deep discounts on all My Pillow products and get your 6-piece My Pillow towel set for only $39.98. Shop mypillow.com/Carter, promo code Carter. That's mypillow.com/Carter. I can't wait for you to hear Dr. Aaron Kheriaty, because he's going to be talking about where our country could be literally in the next decade with the power that has been amassed by the government, these emergency powers that they were able to grab onto during our COVID lockdowns when China, the Chinese Communist Party, released accidentally or on purpose this virus on the world, and how our government and governments around the world took advantage of that, and how we literally right now are living in a time that we never even imagined. It was only in science fiction novels, but it's here and it's real, and it's something that you and I need to pay attention to. So please, please wait, because what you are going to hear is going to terrify you, but is also going to give you the tools that you are going to need to fight back. But before we get there, I want to tell you about AMAC. AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. You know, I love it. It stands for what I believe in. Now is a critical time, you guys, to be vigilant in the defense of our freedom. We just talked about that. There is no better way to do so than by joining the Association of Mature American Citizens. By joining AMAC, you're taking the first steps to saving the America that you love. AMAC offers an alternative to just about every benefit that AARP offers, but guess what? Without any liberal agenda. AMAC's benefits can save you money and potentially a lot of it. Take advantage of the many benefits AMAC offers by becoming a member. I stand with AMAC and I hope that you will too. I encourage you to join today at amac.us/Carter. That's amac.us/Carter. The benefits of membership are great, but the cause is even greater. Join today at amac.us/Carter. Dr. Erin Kheriaty, thank you so much for being on the show with us today. I think this segment is probably going to be one of the most educational and most informative segments for every one of you out there that's going to listen to the doctor. You have written a book that is absolutely incredible. And I want to get to that in a minute, but it's called The New Abnormal, The Rise of the Biomedical Security State. And this is something, I mean, we've all been affected by what happened with COVID. It has been one of, I think, the toughest situations for not just Americans, but for people around the globe, and still is. After the lockdowns, after the vaccinations, the alienation, what do we wear masks? Do we not wear masks? People feeling trapped. I think it was just an absolute nightmare for all of us. But what you have to say in this book, I think, is astonishing. And it's something that we've all been talking about in one way or another, but you've laid it out quite brilliantly. And that is this very real concern of a biomedical security state. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So one way to understand that phrase that I use in the subtitle of The New Abnormal is we've seen a development, really it goes back about 20 years, but it became more manifest during the pandemic. The COVID pandemic was the first time what I call the biomedical security state was sort of rolled out and operationalized and started impacting people's day-to-day lives in very significant and oftentimes very intrusive ways. And so it involves the melding together of three different things. Number one, an increasingly militarized public health apparatus. And I can talk in a moment what I mean by increasingly militarized public health apparatus. That gets united to digital technologies of surveillance and control, right? The smartphone device, which has been only available since 2007 with the invention of the iPhone, which allows for tracking and monitoring of citizens at a level that was previously unimaginable. Extracting data from citizens at a level previously unimaginable. And so one concrete application of this during COVID was the vaccine passport system that was rolled out across Europe, in Canada, in many jurisdictions around the world, where citizens, just to get on a plane, get on a train, go to a restaurant, get back into their own country of origin, had to show a QR code demonstrating that they had done what the public health authorities told them to do, including things like injecting a novel substance into my body, a novel gene therapy into my body, really, that I may or may not have wanted. Now, try to think back before 2020. Try to think back to 2018, 2019. If you would have told, ordinary Americans that they would have to do something like this, people would have, in a year or two, people would have looked at you like you were crazy and said, of course, Americans would never accept those kinds of restrictions on their freedom of movement, their freedom of association. That just sounds like something out of a dystopian Orwell novel. This is the United States in 2019. This is not George Orwell's 1984. But here we are.
Right. I felt like as I was walking through this like dream state, like,
Yeah.
are we really doing this? Am I really watching my neighbors cross the street and walk away from me on a walk just
Right.
because we're going to cross paths because there's somebody out there saying that this virus, which I can't even understand right now, which appeared completely different than what the Communist Party originally made it look like.
Yep.
Remember, because people were falling in the street. I think people forgot all about this. Remember those videos that leaked out of China where people were like at a phone booth or at a bus stop and they would just collapse over
Yeah.
and then an ambulance would rush over and it was like a crazy viral movie. And then I was looking for those people in America, like, when are we going to start falling over?
When is the zombie apocalypse going to hit? Yeah, well, it's clear now, and it should have been clear to us then, Sarah, that was Chinese Communist Party propaganda. Okay, those were propaganda films. And people also forget that the origin of lockdowns, this totally novel measure, nothing like that, the stay-at-home orders, the school closures, nothing like that has ever been done before in human history. People try to compare it to the quarantines of the ancient and medieval world. No, a quarantine in medieval society involved maybe locking the gates of a walled city or closing borders. It often involved telling sick people to stay home, or sick people had to congregate in the same place in the town where they were cared for. But it never involved locking everyone in their home. It never involved refusing to allow people to ply their trade, to work, right, to earn a living. And it never involved closing all the public spaces in a town. So lockdowns were a wholly novel, wholly modern invention. They were never a part of traditional public health planning, either from the CDC or the WHO, until COVID. And
but it seems unethical, but it seems completely unethical to try to. And it was
absolutely
right.
It was unethical, and we now know that lockdowns did far more harm than good. They clearly didn't stop the spread of the virus. 90% of Americans, vaccinated and unvaccinated, have had COVID. So we failed to stop the spread of this respiratory virus, and we should have known that lockdowns were incapable of stopping the spread of a respiratory virus that was this contagious. But the origin of lockdowns, people also forget, was the first region to lock down was Wuhan, China. And the Chinese Communist Party, again, what we now know is clearly propaganda, it was obviously not true, claimed that they had stamped out COVID in their country.
Correct.
By this severe lockdown measure. So Italy copied China, Italy panicked, and then doctors Fauci and Birx, advising the president's coronavirus task force, decided that lockdowns were the way to go. And after the United States lockdown in March of 2020, the rest of the world basically followed. They did what we did, assuming that we knew what we were doing. And we now know that the collateral damage from school closures and lockdowns was far more harmful than any plausible public health benefit. So that was just one example of free and democratic Western nations taking their cues on how to manage a public health crisis from an authoritarian regime, from the Chinese Communist Party. And that brings us to the third element, just to close the loop on your first question. So 3 pieces of the Biomedical Security State: militarized public health, digital technologies of surveillance and control, all of that backed up by the police powers of the state. And we saw the police powers of the state kind of inserting themselves in a sort of micro way into our lives, right? Pull your mask up over your nose, kind of, level of detailed and subtle level of control over every aspect of our behavior. And it just the degree to which this happened so quickly and an entire society transformed overnight, that was an astonishing phenomenon. And, how did that happen? Why did that happen? And more important, where is this going next? That's kind of the central theme of the new abnormal.
Let me tell you, that's exactly what I was going to talk to you about, Doctor, because I see clearly what you're talking about. I saw it clearly when it was happening. I lived overseas most of my life. I grew up traveling most of the world. I traveled to places where, of course, different viruses and different ailments exist than the United States. I spent a lot of my career in Afghanistan. I never wore a mask when I was in villages. I never, unless there was an outbreak or something, or if I was sick and someone would have advised me, but just the normal human response, right, to potential viral infections, right? And all of a sudden, I'm seeing a world completely transformed and willing to give up all of its freedom out of a message of fear that didn't even make sense to begin with. Didn't even make sense. I mean, people were being arrested for going to work or opening their businesses. Children were being forced to cover their faces, babies, little toddlers. And where are we going is what scares me, because common sense does not exist now the way it did before. There are a lot of people that wish they were still wearing masks.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So what's going on?
Yeah, I have patients who say they'll never be comfortable going out in public, going to a theater without a mask on. So I think the first thing to understand is that we were all, in a sense, hypnotized by fear. And we know also that Western governments, supposedly free societies, deliberately deployed fear and deliberately deployed messaging with the intention of increasing fear in people, not with the intention of giving them accurate information on the virus or on health related issues so they could make sound decisions for themselves or their families, but simply to make them more afraid of the virus, whether they needed to be afraid or not, whether they were at high risk or not. And the goal of increasing fear was to increase the level of compliance with whatever the public health authorities had already decided that they wanted, right? We took this kind of one size fits all approach to everything that we did during the pandemic, which was exactly the wrong approach to take. The two most basic facts epidemiologically about COVID, which we knew very early on from studies out of Stanford, Jay Bhattacharya and John Ioannidis showed that the initial reports from the WHO of an infection fatality rate of 3 to 4%, which is a really scary number, right? If I get this virus, I have 3 or 4% chance of dying. That's terrifying, right? That's going to leave a lot of dead bodies. They showed that was exaggerated by a factor of 50 or more, that the actual infection fatality rate was 0.2. Which is not nothing, it's not negligible, it's not trivial, but it's not 3 or 4%. But the second most important fact about COVID, after that fact, which has been replicated many times since, there's no doubt that the infection fatality rate is 0.2%. But that most of those deaths, the vast majority of those deaths, were people over the age of 70. So if you're under the age of 70, particularly if you're under the age of 50, you're not at risk of dying from COVID. At least you're not at risk of dying from COVID any more than you would be at risk of dying from influenza. There's an infinitesimally small risk that shouldn't turn your whole life upside down, right? But instead of taking account of those two facts, we decided to close schools when students and teachers, for that matter, were not at risk. Teachers were at lower risk of contracting the virus at school from kids than they were in any other setting.
Yes.
So we locked everyone down. We initiated vaccine mandates for everyone rather than just for the elderly folks who were at higher risk. We made everyone mask up. And we could talk about masks later, but there's still no evidence that masks stop the spread of respiratory virus, that the cloth masks and surgical masks that people were wearing on the streets are utterly useless for an aerosolized virus. And yet, as you pointed out, there's still people that are attached to the mask as a kind of safety blanket or a kind of talisman to ward off this, unseen, ever-present terror The other thing that was played up deliberately was this notion of asymptomatic spread.
Right.
There's no scientific evidence that asymptomatic spread was a major driver of contagion during this pandemic, which again should not have surprised us because it's never been a major driver of contagion for respiratory viruses. But someone theoretically who doesn't have any symptoms could be a threat to you. What does this do? This turns literally every person you encounter into a potential threat to your existence.
Right. It divided us as a nation.
Exactly.
I mean, on top of everything, it made everybody an enemy of everyone else. I mean, I remember my neighbors were so sweet and they were elderly and they were so terrified. I would call them and say, hey, do you guys want me to, bring some stuff over? Do you need anything? Because they didn't even want to go out of the door. And I just felt horrible for them. Mm-hmm. And I saw it happening across the board. You talked about children. I would go into depreciated neighborhoods, especially very poverty-stricken neighborhoods. During that time, our church was delivering food. And I remember seeing the children, mostly Latino area in Alexandria, Virginia, where I was delivering food, where their parents were maybe have jobs like, I don't know, maybe cleaning or working manual labor. And the kids were just locked in apartments or on the streets, no education. You go, wait, a total disaster.
Disastrous.
So let me ask you this, because you've looked into this. You've seen what's happened. I mean, the effects of this. Why, in your opinion, would governments be so willing to shut down their nations, knowing full well, because nobody can tell me that they didn't have some concept that this was an over-exaggerated response?
Yeah.
And you talk about what happened in Nuremberg, and I think that's very important. I'd like you to explain that. But why would governments be so willing to do that, and why would they want to do that? That's what really frightens me. Are they just trying to see how much control they can have? Did they just get a little taste of it? And I don't know what was going on here, but it terrifies me to think of what could potentially happen.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the right question to ask. And I keep wondering where are the other investigative reporters who should be asking these questions? But, if you're an investigative journalist, you can, a couple of helpful leads in a question like this are, okay, let me first follow the money.
Right.
Who actually benefited economically and financially, or let me follow the power, who benefited in terms of an accrual or a greater monopoly on power. Following the money, many people, actually a few people, made a ton of money during the pandemic. And those few people were the people who are already at the very apex of the socioeconomic pyramid. The tech elites and their world-spanning corporations saw their stocks soar, saw their personal wealth soar. So Amazon lobbied for lockdowns on the West Coast. Was that because Amazon and Jeff Bezos were experts on public health and knew what the best way to manage a pandemic was? No. Look at what happened to Amazon's profits during and after lockdowns. When people are locked down at home, first of all, Amazon's competition is destroyed. All those pesky small businesses where people still buy goods and services were shut down during lockdowns.
Where you go meet a friend. Where you go meet a friend and have actual communication with another human being.
Face-to-face communication.
Right.
But also, so people are also having to do all of their shopping for basic goods and services online. So, people are signing up for Amazon Prime, using Amazon a lot more to get what they need. And their profits soared. Again, Google, Facebook, Meta, as you just pointed out, we're not meeting at the coffee shop anymore. We're not chatting around the water cooler at work. All of our communication, all of our work is being done online. And when we're online, big tech is making money from us. That's their business model. Keep you glued to the screen, keep you scrolling as long as they can. So there was definitely an effort steering people toward lockdowns on the part of people who control the flow of information and who have even more control over the flow of information when all of the communication is being done online. So we now know that social media was censoring any dissident voices critiquing lockdowns. And in many cases, they were doing that at the behest of the government, which brings me to the second part of your question.
Right.
So just a little sidebar here. Your listeners may have heard about this recent lawsuit from the state attorney general of Missouri and Louisiana, Missouri v. Biden. There are 4 private plaintiffs also on that lawsuit. I'm one of them. So I'm helping those 2 states sue the Biden administration, several senior members of the Biden administration, for what we allege to be collusion with social media companies to suppress free speech. Arguably,
Thank you.
You're welcome. So arguably, and I say arguably because there's legal debate about this, but arguably these private social media companies can censor. I believe they're more like public utilities. But anyway, there's debate about that. But no one debates that the federal government cannot censor, and the federal government cannot suborn these private companies to basically be the long arm of its censorship regime. And the documents that we have on discovery so far suggest that that's precisely what the federal government has been doing on a massive, vast scale. I think there's 17 different agencies within the executive branch are implicated now in the evidence that we have with this lawsuit. Basically, they
and you're talking all intelligence agencies, all of them.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes,
going back to the militarization of public health, it's what we're also discovering is that the department, the Health and Human Services (HHS) department, was not actually calling the shots. This is the department that has CDC, FDA, NIH. You'd think these are the people who are sort of organizing our pandemic response. No, the pandemic response was ultimately organized by DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, the home of the FBI, the CDC, the federal intelligence agencies.
And China. I'm just going by, and by extension, China was completely happy with it.
Well, we seem to take our cues from China. And I have a whole section in the book called Wargaming Pandemics, where I go into the sort of melding of public health and the intelligence agencies and the series of kind of pandemic scenarios that they've been modeling for the last 20 years. And the outcome of all of these scenarios is always more stringent control, more stringent surveillance, more need to control entire populations in order to respond to the threat of naturally occurring biological threats or to the threat of biowarfare. So this has been developing behind the scenes for a while, but COVID was like act 1. Okay, let's roll this thing out.
That's what I was just going to ask you. I remember interviewing, and I'm going to say it here because it was one-on-one. It was an open interview when I was at the Blaze with Michael Hayden, former head of the NSA. And I remember talking to him one time and saying to him about, right to privacy, the Constitution. What does this mean anymore in a world where everything is accessible to prying eyes? Everything. And I remember him saying to me, and he said this on the record, and it was something to this effect. People are joking themselves if they believe they have any privacy left. And then that leads me, and this was years ago, that leads me to now and COVID, because what I'm thinking is, are we losing our Constitution, our foundation, what the founding fathers, how they developed this great republic? Is there a collision course between our...
Yes.
Okay.
The Biomedical Security State operates outside the bounds of the Constitution. The Constitution would be seen to be a quaint relic, an obstacle at worst, a quaint relic at best. And one of the legal mechanism that allows this to happen is the declared state of emergency. So I spend some time in the book talking about this issue because it's not one that most Americans are paying attention to. We tend to focus on this, critiquing the specific pandemic policy, right? The idea of doing this is, wearing a mask when I walk into the restaurant and taking it off when I sit down. Well, that's so stupid, which is true, right? But what is the thing that actually allowed all of these stupid policies to proceed? It was the declared state of emergency at the federal level and the declared state of emergency at the state level. We are still operating. Biden just announced after the midterms he was going to renew the state of emergency for another 90 days. It's been renewed every 90 days to almost no media attention by the Secretary of HHS, Javier Becerra, a lawyer with no public health experience, former Attorney General of California, with the endorsement of the president. Now, what does this permit? The president gains 128 additional extra constitutional powers during a state of emergency. So a month ago, when Biden said the pandemic is over on 60 Minutes, which you think would have been politically helpful coming into the midterms, it's true. It's been true for a long time. Why not say it? But his advisors panicked and said, no, you can't say that. Why did they panic? Because they knew, okay, if the pandemic is over, then we're going to have to say that the state of emergency is over. And you're going to have to relinquish all those powers that you assumed and that you delegated to unelected public health bureaucrats and to unelected security state bureaucrats. Right. And we don't want to give up those powers. Right?
Because why? Because we might want to use them in the future? Because we might need them?
This new model of governance entails jumping from one declared emergency to the next. So we're going to milk COVID for all it's worth. And then when it's no longer politically plausible or feasible to maintain an emergency for COVID, there's going to be another crisis that can be reframed as a public health crisis. So look at issues that traditionally would not have been under the purview of public health that have been redefined as public health issues in the last few years. There's several examples. I give two examples in the book. The first is that during the initial lockdowns of 2020, racism was defined by 1,200 public health bureaucrats signing this open letter. Racism is a public health emergency, right? So we need lockdowns for everyone except the George Floyd protesters or the BLM rioters.
Right,
because
Antifa.
Racism is a public health emergency. Exactly. Second issue, it's been done more subtly, but even prior to the pandemic, if you start reading the headlines on climate change and just bracket the debates about climate change, forget about your views on climate change. But climate change has been redefined from primarily an ecological or environmental issue to a public health issue, right? So, look at the way it's presented in the press now. It's always presented in terms of health harms to human populations. Kind of interesting.
Well, I want to say something to that because you brought that up and I was looking at the story today. I actually sent it to one of our writers and I'm going to look into it. But activists are now on Mount Sinai. They are asking on the Pope and other world leaders are going to come and structure kind of a new 10 commandments global for the environment. And they're smashing tablets on top of Mount Sinai to launch a faith-based climate push. So wow. We're living, you know what? A friend of mine said, you got to buy this shirt, Sara, because it's worth it. I'm going to read this to you because now I think that people that are listening to this are going to get it. But it's a t-shirt that says, I need new conspiracy theories because all my other ones came true.
Right. I love it. I need to get one of those too.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to send it to you. But I want to talk about that. I'm going to make
conspiracy theory and mainstream conventional thinking is about 6 months these days.
Well, but the thing is, they make it almost impossible for us to talk legitimately about legitimate issues, about very real subjects that when we question, we used to be a nation where questioning was a part of our blood. It's a part of our lifeline. We stand up to the government. We question it. It used to be that the Democrats and the so-called progressives
question people in power. Yeah.
Frank Church stood up to the NSA in his church hearings. It was like, we are not going to spy on Americans. We are going to find out what's going on. Now that's flip-flopped. Now anybody who stands up and says, well, wait a minute, I don't see people falling on the streets. And why aren't you questioning the Chinese government about where this virus emanated from? And why are you telling me to pull my kid out of school? We're the conspiracy theorists that need to be shut down. This is what's so crazy. Right?
No, that's right. The level of information control is exquisitely refined these days when you have the melding of corporate and state interests and that level of power over the flow of information. This is what you end up with. And it just going back to climate change. So one of the points I make in the book is that even though some of the specific policies like lockdowns or vaccine passports have been rolled back in most regions, though not all, COVID in a sense is just the beginning, because that whole infrastructure that was rolled out, field tested, and mostly accepted by most of the population during the pandemic, that whole infrastructure is still in place, just waiting for the next declared public health crisis. And so there are serious academics from Ivy League institutions and serious politicians in actual positions of power who have put forward proposals to use rolling lockdowns to deal with climate change, or to use rolling lockdowns to deal with the energy crisis in Europe. So these things, what we're getting now is a temporary reprieve, but these mechanisms are not going away. And the next steps, which I also describe in the book, of digital IDs tied to biometric data, central bank digital currencies that are going to be part of this biosecurity model of governance and model of social control, those things are being rolled out in the next year or two. And so Americans have to wake up.
How do we stand up to this? How do we stand up to this, doctor? Because this is what's so terrifying. Nobody knows what to do. They're terrified. I mean, we don't want to get, my husband regrets being forced at his former job in the government. He's retired now, but he was basically told, you have to get the vaccine, and we're inoculating everybody with Pfizer. And if you don't do it, then you're not coming back to work.
Yep.
And they did that to so many people. This is maybe I'm asking a very tough question, because you may not have an answer for that. We may all have to decide. Okay.
Well, I have some thoughts. So
okay.
So my first thought is, I think everyone has to ask themselves, where's my line in the sand? And that may be in a different place for different people. I mean, I sacrificed my job at the University of California, where I'd spent my entire career, because I challenged their vaccine mandate in federal court. That's a case that's still in federal court, by the way, but they fired me a year ago for alleged noncompliance with their vaccine mandate. That was my line in the sand. And I recognize that it's a prudential decision. Other people may need to give in on something like that so that they can support their family, or they don't have any alternatives.
No, or they actually thought that the vaccine. Yeah, they actually thought that the vaccine was supposedly really going to be like every other vaccine, and then in the end realized, wow, this was a big facade. That the vaccine was not what they made it out to be.
Yeah, so I think we have to examine our own life and say, okay, what freedom or what basic civil right would I not be willing to relinquish for the sake of convenience, or even for the sake of my career? And if you don't have a line in the sand, then I think you need to ask yourself the question, why?
Right.
And if you do have a line in the sand, I think you should articulate it clearly in advance so that when you get into that situation, you're prepared to stand firm. But basically, it's going to come down to large numbers of people declining the next steps in this regime. So I think we should collectively decline biometric-based digital IDs. A digital ID in the cloud with your passport, all your demographic information tied into your medical record that can be accessed through your iris scan, your face ID, your fingerprint, so forth. We're starting to see these things being rolled out, and they're going to be pitched on the basis of convenience, right? You'll skip to the head of the security line at the airport. Oh, hey, you forgot your passport at home. Well, you can still make your flight because you've got your digital ID. So it's going to be a kind of velvet glove approach in developed nations. It's going to be a heavier handed approach in developing nations. But I think Americans need to just collectively say, no, we're not going to do that. I'm going to hang on to the old driver's license and the old passport, and I'm not going to continue relinquishing private information to public and private actors or to some system that could easily be hacked, by bad actors.
Correct.
But the first step is to understand, first of all, what's going on and why it's problematic. And, at the risk of shameless self-promotion, I mean, this is what I'm trying to do in the New Abnormal book is to describe, okay, first of all, let's understand what happened to us over the last 3 years. Second of all, let's understand that those things are not over, even if we're getting a temporary reprieve on some of the more stringent measures. And third, here are the next steps in that process. Here's what it's going to look like, and here's how it's going to be sold to you. And here's why a collective and resounding, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to accept that. None of the COVID measures would have been plausible if even 10 or 15% of the population had stood up and said no. 10 or 50% of the businesses just refuse to close. The state does not have enough police power to go shut them all down. It's just impossible.
Right.
They could do it with 1-2% of recalcitrant businesses or citizens, but so it doesn't take everyone. It takes a small group of firm and courageous people who are connected and banded together. So refusing in the future to once again do all of our actions from behind a screen, which made us easier to control, right?
Right.
Made it harder to have that kind of water cooler or hallway based conversation where you're like, hey, look, I think some of this stuff is bullshit, right? It's, I don't get it. Oh, hey, I don't get it either. It doesn't make any logical sense. I mean, I know I'm not an ideologist, but this is crazy.
Right. But we've turned over, and I promise you, I would keep you here for 3 hours. I would be doing a Joe Rogan with you right now, and just Cal and Greg and everybody would be, because I want to bring you back, because I have so many questions, because I know you've diligently gone through this for your book. And I know that this is something you're probably going to continue to expand and write on. But you talk about self-spreading vaccines, and you talk about that phenomena and how it violates human rights. You talk about, this fictional section on Seattle 2030, and you explain.
My favorite part of the book.
Yeah, so exciting. I mean, it's explain why you wanted to include that. I mean, that's an important thing. And also what self-spreading vaccines are. But we have fundamentally, doctor, I believe, based on the response I saw from the majority of people, willingly turned over our rights.
That's right.
Without even a fight, without even hey, I'm not going to do that. That scares me.
That's right. No, it is scary. The self-spreading vaccines I mentioned in the prologue to the book, and those are just in one sentence, using a genetically engineered virus to spread a vaccine. So you inject 10, 15% of the population, and then the rest of the population, without their informed consent, will catch the vaccine by catching this genetically engineered virus from the people who are injected. So if you think that's a good idea, more power to you. I happen to think it's a really bad idea. Hopefully by the end of the book, you'll agree with me. But my favorite part of the book is the epilogue to the book, and it's called Seattle 2030. And it's an attempt to imagine what life will be like 8 years from now if the biomedical security state model continues to advance. And what I say at the very beginning in a footnote to Seattle 2030 is all of the technologies that I talk about in this section already exist. None of this is science fiction. Oh, imagine in the future if we could do this with biomedical technology. No, it's all available. It just hasn't been rolled out on a mass scale yet. But there are people that want to roll this out in this way on a mass scale. And they're very open about their aims and goals. Here's what life might look like for you as an ordinary citizen if that happens, right? So it's an attempt to show us where we're going. I put it not 20, 30 years in the future, which is hard for people to project forward that long. I put it in the very foreseeable future, really, 7, 8 years from now. Yeah, I can imagine my life then. It's not that far down the road. And this is what the transformation of society will look like if we don't collectively recognize what's going on and collectively begin to steer our society in a different direction.
Dr. Kheriaty, you are incredible. Your work is astonishing. You are a true hero to so many people. And to me especially, I think it's so refreshing to meet someone that is willing to do the due diligence, to stand up and to fight for your fight is everybody's fight, even if they don't know it. It really is everybody's fight. It's about retaining our individual human freedom, our individual rights from tyranny, literally. We may not see it now. And everybody may say, well, our government's not going to do that to us, but we don't know what's going to happen 8 years into the future, 5 years into the future, 30 years into the future, when you give all this power to a government that will utilize it to control the masses. And we've seen what's happened in the past throughout history. And God help us now with this type of technology. It could truly change all of humanity and all of humankind if we don't put ourselves and our cultural morals first and figure out okay, where do we need to line up with this? I mean, I think technology is great, but it's not great when you hand it over to tyrannical leaders. It's just not great. Yeah. Where can people go to get your book, to support your work? Let us know that. And I'm going to be bringing you back on.
Thanks, Sara. I enjoyed the conversation. Happy to come back on. Too. So the book is called The New Abnormal. And it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, anywhere you buy books, online or in person. It's available on audiobook. You can download the Audible. It's available on ebook for your Kindle or your Nook. I hope your listeners get the book. I hope they like it. I like to joke that it's a great book to give anyone who fired you during the pandemic as a Christmas gift. So
that's awesome.
Get a copy for your friends. I also post on a regular newsletter on Substack called Human Flourishing. So aaronkheriaty.substack.com, or just do a search for Aaron Kheriaty Substack. That's got some excerpts from the book if you want to get a little taste of the book, see what it's about before you purchase it. And folks can follow me on Twitter as well.
Yeah, guys, get out there, get the book, The New Abnormal, educate yourself. It's The New Abnormal, The Rise of the Biomedical Security State. It is, I think, a must for everyone. I think we really need to put our priorities in order. And like you said, Doctor, find out where we're going to draw the line, because our world is changing drastically. I mean, I feel like we can't even catch up with what has been happening, not only in our nation, but on the planet. And remember, with COVID, it came out of left field. Anything can happen between now and 2024 or 2026, right? We've got to really keep our eyes open, and you've helped us. You've helped us dissect that with this book. Thank you so much, Doctor.
Thanks, Sara.
I'm sure you're feeling very much the way that I am feeling right now after listening to the good doctor there, right? How do we stand firm and stand up to this in a world that's moving so quickly, so fast-paced? And how do we get our government to pay attention to what is happening and not allow them, those in government that really want to put a stop to this, how do we empower them to do that against a growing executive branch, federal government that wants to retain all these kind of emergency powers? My gosh. Even for climate change, guys, think about what is going on here. And I just want to read this to you before we wrap up, because this is a big story and we got to be paying attention to this. But China, just right now, this is November 13th. This is a Reuters story, reported 14,878 new COVID-19 infections for November 12th, including a record number of new daily cases in capital city of Beijing. Obviously, they've got all their COVID security guards marching around Beijing, and as these new cases come, as industrial activity in some of it's in the Gaoxi, I'm hoping I pronounce this correctly, but I know I'm not, Gangshu and Jiangsu provinces has been restricted, and they're basically locking down. You know, they're locking down again. It was just like a couple of days ago that I thought they were going to open back up, but now, no, it looks like China's reversing that. What's going to happen here in the United States? Are we going to go through this ever again? I hope not. The number of daily cases in China rose from 11,950 on November 11th to that 14,761 local new cases. So it was up a lot. The capital city of Beijing apparently recorded up to 235 new cases of COVID. But this sounds like mission creep to me. It sounds like, once again, here we go. You know, China's going to start making these rumbles. We're going to start seeing people walk down again, which I believe is China's way of controlling populations that want to rise up against it. We see what's happening around the world. We saw what was happening in China, in Hong Kong, in Taiwan. We know how the Chinese government operates. The Chinese government operates this way because that is how they control people. Right? We cannot give up our freedoms. Do not give them up anymore. A lot of us did. A lot of us compromised. A lot of us believed the government. We didn't think the government was going to lie to this extreme. You know, think about what you are doing. Think about your children. Don't let people who are lying to you tell you what to do. Educate yourself. It is just that important. It is just that important, guys. Remember to follow me on Twitter at Sara Carter DC and on Instagram at Sara Carter at SCarterDC, on Truth at Sara Carter Official. God bless you. God bless our great nation. And God bless the great state of Texas.